All we have to do is go out on Tuesday and vote, vote, vote. We're gonna win it.
Are we ready to vote? Are we ready to win?
Election Day is tomorrow, and the presidential candidates are making their final pitches to voters. That's where we're starting the 7 from the Washington Post. I'm Hannah Jewell. It's Monday, November 4th. Let's get you caught up with today's 7 stories. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump toured the country on the last weekend of their presidential campaigns. The Republican nominee escalated his false claims of election fraud without evidence. And he told a crowd in Pennsylvania yesterday that he wouldn't mind if someone shot at the journalists covering his rally. He made the remark while complaining about the bulletproof glass surrounding him on stage. That protection has been a fixture of his outdoor events since an assassination attempt against him in July.
And I have this piece of glass here, but all we have really over here is the fake news, right? And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much, because I don't mind.
Meanwhile, the vice president was in Michigan yesterday. Harris used her time there to reiterate her message that she would be a president for all Americans. And on Saturday, she made a surprise appearance to open NBC's Saturday Night Live in New York.
Now, Kamala, take my Pamela. The American people want to stop the chaos
and end the drama
with a cool new stepmamala. Kick back in our pajamas and watch a rom-Kamala.
In case you couldn't tell them apart, that was both Maya Rudolph and Harris. Number 2. The polls remain tight ahead of tomorrow's presidential election. According to the Post's polling tracker, Harris has held her leads nationally and in the battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. There was one surprise this weekend. Harris had a surprisingly strong and highly anticipated poll result in Iowa. But her lead in Pennsylvania shrank in the past week. Trump, meanwhile, is leading in the key swing states of Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. But every single swing state is within a typically sized polling error. That means we should be prepared for anything, even each state going in the opposite direction from what polls are predicting now. And the polls don't tell the whole story. It's not unlikely that if we see a polling error of a typical size, one candidate could run away with the election tomorrow. To win, Harris or Trump must get 270 Electoral College votes, but their paths to that number are different. In today's newsletter, you can find maps detailing each candidate's possible routes to victory. Find a link to that in our show notes. Number 3. Officials are taking extraordinary measures to protect election-related sites. Across the country, authorities are touting unprecedented security plans designed to withstand election violence and other nightmare scenarios. Plans include panic buttons for election workers, snipers on rooftops, and surveillance drones. At least 2 states have activated the National Guard in case of unrest. That's Nevada and Washington. And Arizona's Secretary of State has said he wears a bulletproof vest in case of attack. He's the person who's in charge of certifying statewide results. These extra guardrails have been added since the chaotic fallout from Trump's attempts to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Trump has not committed to accepting the outcome this time around, and he's claimed without providing any evidence that Democrats will cheat to install Harris as president. There's so much more we could tell you today about the election, but this podcast is supposed to be short, so make sure you head over to the Post site to read it all. Number 4. Palestinians and Israeli soldiers said that Israeli forces used civilians as human shields in Gaza. 4 Palestinian men spoke to the Post on the record for this story. They provided vivid accounts of what they described as Israel employing detained Palestinians as human shields in Gaza. That means using civilians or other detainees to shield military operations from attack, and it's considered a war crime under international law. One man described being forced to enter buildings feared to contain explosives and photograph them before Israeli troops were given the all-clear to enter. The men's accounts were corroborated by other witnesses, and they're consistent with interviews and testimony from Israeli soldiers who fought in Gaza. Meanwhile, it was another bloody weekend in Gaza. The chief executive of the nonprofit UNICEF warned that the entire population in the north is at imminent risk of dying from famine, disease, and bombardment. Number 5. Quincy Jones, the legendary music producer and arranger, has died. Jones had an incalculable impact on American popular music, from bebop to hip-hop. He elevated the voices of dozens of iconic entertainers like Frank Sinatra, Paul Simon, and Aretha Franklin. But he's probably most famous for his work with Michael Jackson. He produced 3 of Jackson's biggest albums in the 70s and 80s, Off the Wall, Bad, and most notably, Thriller. That includes his work on this iconic track, Beat It. In 1985, he produced the all-star charity song We Are the World, which raised $50 million for African famine relief. Jones died yesterday at his home in Los Angeles. His death was announced this morning. He was 91 years old. A new kind of battery could be better for the environment. That's number 6. For years, scientists have been researching alternatives to batteries made out of lithium. Much of the world relies on this kind of battery, but the mining and processing of its materials can be harmful to workers, local communities, and the environment, and disposing of them can leach toxins. One alternative could be batteries made out of sodium. Sodium-ion batteries are made from cheaper and more abundant materials, and they also last longer. But they're also larger and heavier than lithium-ion batteries, so they're not ideal for smartphones or electric vehicles. But they could be a good candidate in situations where the size of the battery isn't a concern, like energy storage. These batteries are still in the early stages of development. And at number 7. A Chicago museum scanned dozens of mummies to unlock their secrets. Researchers at the Field Museum in Chicago recently scanned 26 Egyptian mummies. The effort created thousands of X-ray images that offered new insight into how ancient Egyptians lived and died. The mummies were placed in a mobile CT scanner that produced 3D images of the contents of their wrappings. It gave experts a way to view the remains without physically disturbing the mummified individuals. And it's already solved a few mysteries. One mummy, known as Lady Chenet Ah, lived about 3,000 years ago. She was buried in a sealed funerary box with no visible entry point. For years, experts have been confused about how she could have been placed inside. CT scans revealed the box was molded around her embalmed and wrapped body while the mummy was held upright. The scans also revealed that her eyes were replaced before her burial. The researchers think that was probably in an attempt to prepare her to view the afterlife. You can find out more about these mummies in our newsletter today. Just follow the link in our show notes. That's the show for today. Thanks for listening. It's going to be a busy week, and we're happy to help you make sense of it all. If you like the podcast, a great way to support our work is through a subscription to The Washington Post. Right now, we have an election sale. You can get an all-access digital subscription for just $29 for the first year. Subscribe to The Post by going to washingtonpost.com/subscribe. I'm Hannah Jewell. I'll meet you back here tomorrow.